Hello and welcome to SUMERSPORTS Live. I'm Quinn McLean. He's Parker Fleming. We just watched number 8 Ohio State cap off the first expanded college football playoffs and their winning of their ninth national championship over number 7 Notre Dame. And the first for Ryan Day, joining the legendary ranks for Ohio State coaches. As we dive in, Parker, what's your immediate reaction from this game?
Yeah, I'm glad it got a little spicy there in the second half, Quinn. It was looking like it was a little bit of maybe a little bit of a snoozer there after a 21-point first or second quarter by Ohio State there, but Notre Dame claws back 16 second half points there to done what they've done all season, try to keep things in striking distance. We'll get into it. A couple, I think, some key mistakes by Notre Dame that on the margin. It was surprising they were as close in the game as they were with some of those mistakes. But, Quinn, in college football specifically, you can optimize everything. You can stay healthy. You can get breaks in the schedule. And sometimes, man, you just got to defend Jeremiah Smith one-on-one. And if you can't do it, you're not going to win the game. And I think that's what it came down to this evening.
Yeah, it's so fitting that was kind of the end to this game and the big plays. I think Notre Dame, and we'll get into some of these big plays throughout and some of the scoring plays, but I think Notre Dame capping up to that big reception did a pretty good job in the second half as far as clamping down on Smith and keeping him limited. But he is inevitable. He is hard to guard, and playing man-to-man coverage on him, I think, is the story of the game overall. But let's get into the scoring plays, Parker, as this game went on. First drive for Notre Dame, I think it's the drive that they should feel pretty good about. It was a clock eater, 9 minutes and 45 seconds. Featured 2 fourth down decisions, 9 quarterback designed runs. And the quarterback design runs are my favorite part because you got a QB counter, a QB power, QB draw, QB RPO, and a pass. Not to quote Booby Miles from Friday Night Lights, he could do it all in there is what we saw. And then there was so they scored earlier. Go back to Ohio State. We saw the motion play from Chip Kelly to get Smith open on the cutback route. Shades of Andy Reid in this past Super Bowl a little bit, where they would motion into the quarterback, cut back out wide open into the end zone.
And Alabama in versus Ohio State as well. We've seen that play before. I love it.
Yeah, it's an automatic touchdown in the red zone, and it's cool to see, especially with Jeremiah Smith, him automatically getting open on that. You go back to Ohio State; they had the long drive again, punching in on third down from Judkins, his first score, and then another drive before the half where Howard is scrambling, hits Judkins wide open to the red zone. Judkins leaking past the linebacker spy there. Ohio State first half, no punts, converted all third downs. Just operating, and it was kind of a Chip Kelly masterclass in that first half, and they were operating at will. Get into the second half, Judkins had the inside counter a bit. They motioned 2 DBs over, and he was set up for a huge run, and it set him up for a short, easy third touchdown for him. And then we get back to Notre Dame, where they're, as we touched on, trying to operate on those margins. Tried the fake punt, had the guy open, dropped the pass. There was that questionable field goal call where they trying to get points and cut the margin a little bit, and then they had that big play from Greathouse, who had a pair of touchdowns in this game. And then I think the other big game from Notre Dame, where you had a feeling of momentum boating in their way, is they had the interview with Marcus Freeman, where he's like, "If we just get a stop and a turnover, very next play, Drake Bowen punches it out from Magbuka. They get the ball back. They're driving, and that one only eked out into a field goal, which hit the upright. I think Notre Dame tried to get a lot into this, but ultimately was not enough for the inevitable offense that Ohio State was. Any plays I missed into that, Parker, from that breakdown?
No, I think that's a great recap of kind of how how we got to the final score there. Definitely a little bit of a lull for Ohio State in the second half, in the fourth quarter, maybe turning it off a little bit and just kind of trying to run it out, which is ironic. Notre Dame wanted to shorten the clock in the first half, and then Ohio State tried to do that there as well. I think some really interesting plays. I mean, I don't know if you can say enough about that first drive from Notre Dame. When we talk about scripted drives, Quinn, we talk about not exactly, hey, we're going to run these plays in a row, but more so like, hey, this is going to be our point of attack. These are going to be the concepts we kind of poke and prod and try to figure out very clearly. Notre Dame saw initially the way Ohio State was kind of fitting the run, that there was an advantage in the quarterback run game, and they exploited that a lot. Riley Leonard sacrificed the body, got his moment there. I think something that stands out though as we move off of the scripted drives, and so when we say off the scripted drives, it's not just again that they don't have the play call written down, that it's improvising. They're saying, hey, we're reacting to the information they got. And Notre Dame got an 18 play sample on that first drive of what Ohio State was going to try to do against the run game, and A really rough situation. They get a false start and it's second and a mile. And so Notre Dame trying to respond after an Ohio State touchdown. You're into the second quarter already. Gets into a situation where they are against, behind the sticks, having to face this pass rush, having to face these
Right.
safeties and cornerbacks. And there's a holding call that makes that, second and another mile, or I guess third and a mile there. And so Notre Dame has to punt. And that really felt like the point where you knew, all right, Notre Dame did everything they could on that first drive. Really great. Feels like this one might get away from them. And so that was kind of a big inflection point there. And then on drive 3 as well, the 3rd and 5, they fumbled the ball. They lost some yardage there and going to go punt. And you just thought, this is it. The game is over. At that point, it turned into 21-7 at halftime and did look like much more than a 14-point lead. Props to them for kind of clawing back in the second half. I think Greathouse stepped up again in a big way. Evans had a big just big reception for Notre Dame as well. Both of those guys, excellent at finding seams and making defenders miss. Seems like defenders just kind of fall over, have their shoes tied together when either one of those guys gets the ball downfield. Great effort from Notre Dame to kind of scrap back, be within striking distance. But I think we should talk about the mistakes even before we break into, if we want to get diver there. I think a couple big mistakes from Notre Dame, specifically in kind of, our world, Quinn, of the nerdiness, the analytics.
Right.
The fake punt with Riley Leonard's short yard success rate. I think you just need to run a play. I don't think you're really fooling anybody when you bring your backup quarterback in. And there's guys specifically on the sideline who are watching that. I think I would have just lined up and gone for it. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think like you have shown the entire game that you're able to get a bunch of yards in these short situations, especially with Riley Leonard. And I think this would have been a moment for me. And one thing I wrote down is what we didn't see from a Notre Dame offense is the incorporation of their running backs throughout this game. We know Jeremiah Love was kind of banged up all throughout the college football playoffs. He only really had 3 rushes, 1 yards in the first half. Price, the backup running back, 2 rushes, 11 yards in the first half, 9 yard long. So outside of their running backs, Riley Leonard was kind of the offense in terms of rushing. I think that was a short-term situation where you could have deked the defense a little bit and went back to your running backs, or just have an end around or something. The classic end around that, you should get some automatic plays there. I felt like that was something that I would have called from there. But I think it's doing the simple things and not trying to galaxy brain it itself. And I think you're trying to allude to the other marginal call there is the field goal call, right?
Yeah, and it's not so much the field goal because it's 4th and goal at the 9. But second and third down, Notre Dame is a team that does kind of play to set up those 4th downs, and it feels like you've got to know you're going for this regardless, and kind of set your play calls up there. So the 4th down decision I think is very bad, but it's not totally egregious when you compare it to kind of how they got to that 4th down as well. Felt very uncharacteristic. Both of those moves felt a little bit panicky, a little bit back against the wall, which it was, to be fair, for Notre Dame, but it feels very uncharacteristic about what we know and expect out of the Notre Dame coaching staff and what they've done all season. Those certainly stand out in my mind, Quinn. Let's break down some units. Let's talk and get into that. Where do you want to start?
I mean, let's start with the strength here. The Ohio State offense versus Notre Dame defense in the first half. In short, Chip Kelly was cooking this game. I think the thing that I looked at from this was a lot of pre-snap motions the Notre Dame defense couldn't catch up to. There was the Judkins breakaway in the second half, rather, that he motioned 2 guys over, both the safety and the linebackers, and then it was an inside zone play, and then Judkins made a great cutback to kind of break it open. And I think that was kind of what Chip Kelly, when he needs to, he can manufacture getting guys open and getting holes open in terms of the run plays. And Notre Dame, to my surprise, never really adjusted to that. They started the game playing man coverage, which is a choice against this Ohio State receiving core. I think the game plan we saw from Texas last week in terms of playing that too high and keep everything in front of you was what we've seen be successful, and what these teams that have disrupted against Ohio State offense in the past, which I thought Notre Dame would show in this game, is have a disruptive defensive line a bit, and then try to keep and kind of mix it up in terms of your coverage to confuse the quarterback. And that's where the Michigan game plan, I think we've alluded to in a lot of our pods together, is have that disruptive. And it shows, Riley Mills being out for this game. There wasn't a lot of pressure from the defensive lines. And I think I was a bit surprised with Al Golden and what we've known from him to dial up some blitz. Kudos to the Ohio State offensive line. Like, that zone blocking scheme, I know they've lost some Josh Simmons and Seth McLaughlin, but that eases the constraint on a lot of mix and match offensive linemen there to be able to pick whatever's in your zone, whatever the stunt or the blitz that comes into it. So yeah, kudos to them on that. And yeah, I'll pitch that back to you. What stood out for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a couple things there. So one, I think the broadcast talked about man coverage a whole lot, and some of that is like it's not, we're not picking every play. Hey, we're playing man or zone. It's like we're a man defense, and we've drilled this and practiced this. We can't just necessarily flip the switch. But even then, I feel like Kelly had him on skates a little bit. You saw the first time Notre Dame kind of sagged back and tried to play a little bit of zone, Egbuka caught it short and went and just ran over a defensive back.
Right.
Like they just knew where they were going with it after there. Quinn, when you think about kind of the secondary being a weak link system, like secondary and offensive line, right? You're only as good as kind of your worst performance in those units. I think you also have to kind of include a coefficient there in your brain about the front seven and specifically the pass rush and the way like those guys disrupt affects how much time you have to cover, what the angles are covering. Is the quarterback running, looking for, moving guys down in space, and just Notre Dame's defense. It's a really long season, and the front seven is not as good as some of the other ones that have disrupted Ohio State in the past. And so they kind of, it feels like I'm putting these players on blast. I really don't mean to do this, but they just couldn't hold up their end of the bargain on the front seven to give those defensive backs the latitude that they normally work with. Then they're one-on-one in key situations. And again, you just got to match up on this. Best wide receiver that Notre Dame saw this season was Elijah Surratt, Zachariah Branch, maybe.
Yeah,
but they did not see anything like the 1-4 that they have. You saw Egbuka get very involved early, just kind of all over the place in the receiving game. 64 yards, 6 receptions. Jeremiah Smith finally getting the ball, five receptions, 88 yards. One of those was that 56-yard big one at the end. So, not amazingly productive from Smith. He got the touchdown and got the big play, but a little bit quiet outside of that. And then you saw Tate get involved once or twice, just as that other option. Innes with a big catch on third down to extend a drive there as well. So Ohio State was able to go multiple in the passing game, and kind of like we talked about, find multiple options to make you pay. I think Notre Dame can cover your number one option, but when you have 3 or 4 guys who are legitimately number one-ish threats at the FBS level, that's where you really get into trouble. And we saw that with the pass game.
Yeah, I think like the coverage unit did as much as they could. Like there was a few play action plays that Ohio State was running and screens that they didn't overcommit on. They kept it in front of them, but there's, as you touched on, is like Ohio State's still athletic when they catch the ball in those situations that they create space. That's really hard if you don't have a front seven really creating pressure in the face of Will Howard. And that's where Michigan and Oregon created a lot of havoc for him in games in the previous, is the interior defensive line pushing up, forcing him to get outside the pocket. I think that, at least eliminates half the field that you have to work with from a defensive standpoint. Yeah. And that's something that, Notre Dame kind of, ran out of gas is probably the light way to put it as the season went on. But so let's move over to Notre Dame offense versus Ohio State defense. What stood out for you in this?
Yeah, I mean, looking at kind of, Ohio State's defense and where things came from, Caleb Downs, just an exceptional football player. I think that first Notre Dame drive was 18 plays and not like 7 plays, in part because Caleb Downs made a couple good tackles and kind of filled in nicely there. Really, really great player. 5 total tackles, and all 5 of his are solo tackles, just going to speak to, he just finds the ball in space and makes these athletic plays. Really, really impressive to watch. JTT with 5 tackles and a sack. Only 2 sacks in total. It felt like the pressure kind of changed the gravity a little bit more than that all game, but it also felt like because of the run threat, Ohio State really at very few points kind of pinned their ears back and tried to get pressure. They were content to rush 3, 4. We saw, into half, they rushed 3 and got pressure and disrupted stuff. And I think their whole plan was just move Leonard and hope your secondary kind of hangs on. And Notre Dame is trained well to come back to the ball. There's a couple underneath plays there where they were able to, save a third down, get some generate some offense by being able to kind of pick up those underneath throws. But overall, the Ohio State pass rush did a great job just because they were so disruptive that Leonard was getting the ball out quick, not able to kind of access the full progression that he wanted. And then of course, the run game I think is was again bottled up for Notre Dame. We've seen that. I would guess, Quinn, that Jeremiah Love is not 100% at any point in this postseason, or at least these last two games, which is unfortunate. Great player, but yeah, the 53 total rushing yards there. Most of that was Riley Leonard, and most of that was Riley Leonard on that first drive.
Yeah, I wrote that exact same thing down. I think the game plan I took away from Ohio State was let's try to get Notre Dame pinned in the third and long situations, knowing that that's the kryptonite of this offense. And you saw that throughout the game that Notre Dame really relies on the run game to get the game going in terms of picking up some short yardage. And, as the first drive kind of narrated a bit was let's get a 10-minute drive. Let's not get the Ohio State offense back on the field. And that felt like a winning scenario for Notre Dame as this game progressed. One thing I noticed from the Ohio State defense that adjusted from that first drive to second drive is we know this Jim Knowles offense is a bit of a hybrid. They show some 3-man fronts, some 4-man down fronts as well. The first drive, they were 4-man down fronts. And then the second drive against this Notre Dame offense, they switched to three-man down fronts with an extra guy just an up end. And that extra guy ended up being JTT against this new left tackle that was slotted in for this game, the true freshman. And as you pointed out, he took absolute advantage of him this entire game and kind of disrupted Leonard. And it also created the extra linebacker for Ohio State to create some, disguise blitz, some late blitzes to force Riley Leonard to make a tough decision. And so that adjustment from the first half, and what I noticed too was wide receivers were not getting great separation, which is kind of a difficult task against this Ohio State coverage unit, which we know that they can move a lot of guys around, and they've got great slot corners and
with extremely respectfully with who these Notre Dame receivers are against this Ohio State secondary. That was not something I was anticipating seeing really at all out of them. That is an area, not to shift us, out of that and moving forward, like Notre Dame. Okay. We're at the end of the Graduate with Dustin Hoffman. We're at the end of the movie. We've got the girl. We're sitting on the bus. The music's playing. What now? Okay, your what now is find some receivers. Like, you had this magical season. You got to find a deep threat immediately.
Yeah, I felt like I was waiting on Notre Dame's offense to incorporate their running backs into the passing unit. And that was their bread and butter against Penn State. And to me, that showed a weakness of the Ohio State defense against Texas, is that Quinn Ewers was dumping off to Blue and Weisner in that game, and they were able to get big chunk yardage and set up the run inside. And Love and Williams had a quiet night in terms of receiving as well. I was waiting for one of those running backs to step up, and it probably just speaks more to the Ohio State's linebacker safeties being that athletic to bottle up some of those running back routes in the flats. So I think that speaks to it as well. And then, kudos to Greathouse. He made a lot of big play in the second half. He had that touchdown, the 34-yard gain. It felt like the Ohio State defense was keeping everyone in check, and we'll give you Greathouse as the guy that if you'd absolutely need to pass in a must pass situation. And so kudos to them on the game plan there. Parker, like how do these teams move forward into the offseason? What are some things that stick out for you in terms of Notre Dame and for Ohio State?
Yeah, I mean, definitely for Notre Dame, like, you have to, and Marcus Freeman's doing this. We've talked about they have the want to, they have the chemistry. Like, you cannot let the results of this game kind of define where you go after this. I think you have to talk about, hey, we won the second half. Like, we came back, we had a legitimate shot at this for a game that was 21-7 after 3 possessions in the first half. And they kind of flipped the script a little bit in the second half and moved things around. I think for Notre Dame, like, obviously both these teams are turning over quarterbacks. Ohio State's going to have 14, 15, 16 guys drafted, maybe. I mean, they're going to completely retool. This did feel like the top of their development cycle. And we'll have to, kind of retool from there. But I think the key thing for Notre Dame and for college football in general is to understand, like, this is a long season. Notre Dame absolutely should be celebrated. They did great. They competed on the biggest stage. They won multiple playoff games, kind of proved proved their worth in being there and had a real shot at this. So this game, I mean, obviously sad for Notre Dame, but I think in general, when we're looking at kind of where they try to move, the biggest thing is how do you keep that culture going, losing some key guys that you're going to lose this season, specifically Riley Leonard, and how do you find a new leader and kind of develop around him?
Yeah, I think you kind of hinted at it, is like retention strategy among college football teams could be absolutely imperative for teams that have the eyes on a long-term run in the college football playoffs. And let's use a vacuum here of Jeremiah Love having a second running back like Ohio State is. If Henderson goes out, you feel pretty comfortable with Judkins being the guy for the rest of the game. And so I think that's going to be the depth for a lot of these blue blood, schools that we're continually calling the name of in terms of the transfer portal and high school recruiting, is let's keep the guys we have, develop and fill the holes we need to immediately. And Ohio State, I feel like, had the blueprint for that in terms of getting their national championship. A cool note here.
One might argue that they might have the green print for for doing that too. Is that certainly a factor? And as we move into the revenue share, there'll be different ways for teams to strategize and kind of move in there. And interesting. I mean, we could dive in deep and talk about. I mean, Quinshawn Judkins himself is like an amazing story, just because. Yep. It didn't work out his old spot, and they probably needed a run game this year really, really badly. So all sorts of interesting, things to get into about roster building and composition. But I think the bottom line comes back to college football still a developmental sport. If I'm Notre Dame, I'm having a really positive film session on Monday, and then sending the guys off for a couple of weeks and getting back in the lab a couple of weeks after that.
Yeah, and if you're Notre Dame, you've got a lot of young talent that is exciting for the future. Christian Gray, Leonard Moore, your true freshman corners that are going to be people we're going to get calling the numbers for years, right? Like they're
$20 million playoff payout that you're sharing with no one. I mean, this is like huge for Notre Dame. You can't overstate how big of a deal this was.
Yeah. But shout out to Ohio State on their 9th national championship. Cool note is they won the first in the expansion to the 4-game format, and now they're the first to win in the expansion to the 12-game format. So shout out to them in terms of their win in capping a great college football season. Now we turn our heads into the offseason, draft season. If you want to hear more at Sumer Sports Network, we have a great new podcast from our colleague Sam Brookhouse with Draft FM. He is interviewing some great talent all across the draft universe. And there will be some sprinkling of Parker and I throughout the offseason in terms of the various Sumer Sports Network. So be on the lookout for podcasts that we'll be jumping on as we get to the offseason, which the offseason is where we make our bread and butter for Parker and I in terms of the model and the day and that we're working on. Some of the stuff in terms of what talking ball is all fun, but that's exciting to keep progressing the sport into the future. So be on the lookout for new and exciting content from Sumer Sports. Parker, any last closing thoughts as we get out of here?
No, man, enjoyed the last couple of days, us getting to do some of these recaps and kind of dipping our toes into some of this content stuff, and excited for the next couple of months as we ramp up into the draft and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, he's Parker Fleming. I'm Quinn McLean, and this has been Sumer Sports Live.